this second part of the session, we are going to focus on case study research and in how you should perform an interview and collect data from different sources. I strongly recommend you that you have a look at this textbook, which is Gene 2009 Case Study Research Design and Methods, because this is a book of reference for case study methodology. You can find the access to this book through the reading list of this week, and also I'm sharing other textbook which is available online and is focused on case study methodology. Okay, the first question that arises in a case study research is, what is my case? In the first part of the session, we define case as a phenomenon of some sort occurring in a bounded context. This is important to take into consideration. The first step that you need to follow is obviously to define your case. Your case is going to be your unit of analysis and obviously should be connected with your research question. But basically, when you are defining the case, you are deciding what is the phenomenon that you are going to study. This phenomenon could be a role in terms of analyzing people taking a particular role in the organization, like the project manager, the CEO, the architect, the designer. The phenomenon can be an organization like Crossrail, UCL is, also could be an event, an specific project or mega project, a company takeover, could be a period of time, for example, a day in the life of a project manager, um, could be a process, the adoption of a new particular technology or the implementation of a specific legislation or new policy. Also, the phenomenon could be a culture. Let's say, for example, London skaters. The phenomenon can be also something a little bit more generic, such as an industry, the UK construction industry, or the Chinese construction industry, or a nation, okay, a particular country. Well, once you have decided your case, you have defined the phenomenon that you are going to analyze, you will have to set the boundaries around your case. Basically, you have to reflect on who and what will not be part of your study. Okay, you have to set the limitations around your case in order to determine what is the actual fact that you are studying. The case study is the most common method of qualitative research, but at the same time, we can differentiate different designs for case study research. The most common one is the single case study. Basically, we will be deciding a critical case or extreme or unique case which is relevant to illustrate our research question. Also, we can decide a single case study because we can find a representative or typical case, or because this case is particularly revelatory. And other option is when we have to analyze a phenomenon over time and we decide to use a single case to run a longitudinal case. Other different design is the embedded single case design, is when we can find a case within a case. You will have an example in Moodle in order to understand better this case study design. And finally, other design is a multiple case study. Basically, the idea is to replicate the case, for example, across different industries or different regions, in order to achieve some kind of generalization of the results. The problem with the multiple case study is that it takes usually a considerable amount of time. So, to summarize, we will be selecting the case which is most suitable to address our research question. It means a case that fits with our research question and that from our understanding we consider that is accurate to provide an answer to our research question. So this way to choose our case is what we call purposive sampling, which is radically different to random sampling, which is used in quantitative research, as we will be explaining in a couple of weeks. Case studies are usually built by using different sources of evidence. This is what we call data triangulation. By using data triangulation, we will be looking at the same fact, at the same phenomenon, but from different perspectives. One can be the interviews, but also we can use archival information, different documents, direct observation, or even participant observation when the researcher take part in the phenomenon itself. The principle of the data triangulation is to get a more objective perspective of the phenomenon by using different sources to analyze a particular fact or phenomenon. There are four critical conditions that will determine if our case study is well designed or not. These main aspects to consider are the construct validity, which is basically to show if, with our case, we are measuring what we want to measure, if we are identifying the correct operational measures. The second aspect is the internal validity. According with this item, we need to check if we are establishing the causal relationship. This will apply for the explanatory studies only. The external validity is basically to check the domain to which the study's findings can be generalized. The generalization of results will be defined as probably the main limitation of the case study methodology. And last, the reliability, which is basically to demonstrate that the procedures that we were following in our case study could be replicated with the same results. It means basically that the method was reliable. Regarding data collection, the main strategies for qualitative research are three: the interviews that we will be covering later, and basically we can distinguish three different types: open-ended, semi-structured, and structured. The second one is to gather the information from documents and archival data, let's say reports, magazines, or the minutes from meetings. And the third strategy is observation. In observation, we can differentiate between objective observation, or when the researcher is participant in and observer of. It means that the researcher is integrated into the phenomenon that is analyzing. As we said before, uh, this kind of data collection is the main tool used in ethnography. Now we are going to center in the main data collection tool for qualitative research, which is the interview. The interview is very good at providing rich and detailed qualitative data to understand people's experience. The way people describe their own experience and the meaning that they associate with this experience will give us very interesting information about any fact. The second point is that obviously your interview should be aligned with the research question, but we have to build this alignment by producing our interview questions, which are the questions that you will ask in order to gain the understanding that will lead you to answer the research question. We can distinguish different types of interviews depending on how rigid or flexible are. The most rigid interview is the structure interview because this type of interview uses a predefined set of questions. So you're going to follow a number of questions that you have already prepared and detailed in advance. The second type is the semi-structure. You are using some kind of guide for this interview, but you will be still open to introduce more questions or questions derived from an initial question or any questions that you think that will enhance the discussion. So this kind of interview is more flexible than the structured one. And finally, we can find the unstructured interview. In this type of interview, the researcher will be using open-ended questions to explore the people experience and their interpretation. So obviously this is the type which is more flexible and more open. Here you have some practical aspects that you should take into consideration before performing an interview. The first one obviously is decide which type of interview you are going to do and develop the questions according with the type of interview. As we said, it can be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. The second aspect to consider is who is going to participate in your interviews. So it's interesting to analyze why you consider that a person or group of people are interested to do your interview. How many people are you planning to interview? When and for how long each interview will last? Where will the interviews take place? Please keep in mind that you should approach the interviewees in an ethical and professional way. A good practice, obviously, is to record and transcribe the interview. But please remember to ask for consent in advance. Also, it's a good practice to explain to the interviewees how you are planning to use this data, how you are planning to handle the data, and how you are planning to ensure anonymity. In this year, because of the pandemic situation, the school has decided that no physical face to face interviews will be allowed according with the ethics procedure. So for this academic year, the interviews will have to be online wherever you are located, okay? But even for online interviews, think about the location of the interview, okay? Particularly in that case, in order to have a good connection to the internet, to be in a quiet environment, that we don't have any background noise, etc. In this slide, you have some guidance on how to conduct an interview. The first advice is that you should start with introductory questions in order to create a more relaxed environment. This type of question will allow you to warm up the respondent. Typical warm up questions are about the background or about the role in the organization, something to break the ice. Then, in the key question, which are the questions that will be more relevant for your research question, you must keep the focus of the respondent in answering the questions properly. So, if you feel that the respondent is not being so cooperative or not explaining things in detail, please ask them to provide more examples or further explanation or something of interest to you. Sometimes the respondents will go off on a tangent, and you should try, politely, obviously, to refocus the attention of the interview on what is of interest to you, on what is going to give you the information that you are looking for. So you will have to regain the control of the interview in a polite way. Finally, you can include the closing questions. Usually, this type of questions are more open ended. An example is to ask about any type of experience that the respondent can consider relevant to the understanding of the phenomenon that you are analyzing. Here you can find some typical issues that you should avoid when doing an interview. The first one is the lack of focus. You are the responsible to keep the focus on what is important for you. Another typical mistake is when the introduction, the warm up question are too long and you are not going to the point. Other typical issues affect the questions itself when the questions are not very clear or specific, or they are too long, or they are too complicated. They are not clear enough for the interviewer. Also, it's very important that you consider the structure of the question in order that you are providing the contextualization for further question, and you are giving the interviewer the opportunity to delve into the topic that you are exploring. Sometimes there will be factors which are not under your control. Like, for example, if the interviewer is impatient because she or he has to jump to another meeting, or maybe because that person is too dominant and or interrupting. But don't forget that during the interview, you are in charge of the process, and politely you should try to re-guide the interview to the topic that you want to explore. Sometimes the problem could be the interview setting itself. As I said, this year the interviews are going to be online, so try to perform the interview in a quiet environment with the guarantee that the connection is going to work, that the microphone works, that the quality of the sound is good enough, etc. The final issue is connected with time management. Keep in mind the time that you have agreed with the interviewer in advance, and try to control the time during the interview in order you can achieve the objective of asking all the questions that you have prepared for the interview. Other aspect to consider is how to keep records of your interview. This year, because we are asking you to this year because we are asking you to do online interviews, I think the best way would be to record the interview. So obviously you will have to ask for permission in order to record the conversation. If for any reason the interviewer decide that she or he doesn't want to be recorded, you will have to write your own notes during the interview and try to create a database for documentary data. Here you have a list of do's and don'ts for your interview. I recommend you to read this list before having your interview. Some typical tips for the interview is obviously to be ready for the interview, time management, be polite, ask one question at a time, ask for further clarification questions if you think that something is not clear enough, ask for example, obviously express gratitude, ensure the anonymity, and the most important one, listen. And what you should avoid. It's important, don't introduce this kind of question like, wouldn't you agree that? Because you will be introducing bias. Don't ask close-ended question, yes no question. Obviously, don't interrupt or be impatient. Try to use a language that the person that you are interviewing can understand easily. And please don't ask questions that require any kind of moral judgment. As we said when we were talking about data triangulation, it's very important to complete the case study with more information apart from the interview. And an important source of information are the documents. We can use different types of documents, like reports from governmental organizations such as policies, white papers, position papers, etc. Also, documents which are published by companies, especially if we are using a company as a case study. In that case, we can use the annual reports, the mission statements, advertisements, the corporate social responsibility report. Also, we can use some media documents or information from online communities, but keep in mind that the information needs to be reliable. Also, you could use personal documents in the situation that your case study is based on a person. So, in that case, you can use letters, diaries, personal notes, etc. But overall, the most important thing is to consider the quality and relevance of the data that you are using from documents. Are these data authentic, are credible, are representative, are meaningful for your research? To finalize, we are going to talk about the generalization of the results from qualitative studies. So, an important question to consider is to what extent are the findings from a qualitative study applicable to other situations? You need to understand that this is the main limitation of the qualitative method because actually it's difficult to justify the generalization of results, especially if you are using a single case study. So sometimes you will have to look for other cases which are similar in the literature or that are consistent with the conclusions from your case study. Also, you need to consider the boundary conditions, basically under what conditions or circumstances you think that your findings could be applied. In case that we want to generalize the results, we will generalize the theoretical proposition, obviously not to the populations. All these issues around generalization will be addressed in your discussion section or included in your limitations. section. To conclude, I just want to add a kind reminder that you need to complete your research proposal by 4th of November. Okay, here you have the main structure, title, aim and objectives, purpose or rationale of the study, theoretical motivation. You should at least have identified 5 papers which are relevant for your research, a briefly explanation of your methodology, your expected contribution, references, and work plan. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you understood everything we were explaining in that session. You will have the opportunity to ask your questions in our synchronous session next Monday. I'm looking forward to seeing you all then. Goodbye.